Your sexual trauma might have happened in your childhood, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't have negative reverberations in your adult life. Today, we're going to talk about how to heal the sexual trauma and what the sexual trauma is, because there are a lot of misconceptions about this topic. Welcome to the Connection Catalyst podcast, episode number 21. I'm Karolina, the Connection Catalyst, and I'm here to help you deepen your connection with yourself, with others, and with the world around you. And today, I would like to touch upon the topic that is kind of also a bit taboo because, of course, our cultures and all the repression of sexuality that happened because of that and the religions and everything made it so that now people don't really talk about sexual stuff. And I'm here to change it because sexuality is the creative energy. And without it, we cannot really be fulfilled if we constantly repress it, suppress it, deny it, reject it, or disown it. It's a part of us, as of every human on this earth. So if we are not okay with our sexuality, more so even than okay, if we're not utilizing our sexuality, if we're not expressing it, embracing it, if we're not letting it flow, we end up feeling not really fulfilled in our life. So, what is sexual trauma? Because this is important to define before we go into anything else. So, first, let's define the trauma. What is trauma? It's a distress that was not resolved. So it's an emotional charge stored in your body that was once suppressed and stayed in there rather than addressed and expressed and resolved. So, therefore, there are various degrees of sexual trauma. It doesn't have to be rape, that is a very, very big one, or any kind of like physical sexual abuse, but it could be something like your boundaries not being respected in a sexual way, some energy that was going your way, sexual energy from the person that you didn't want to have in you, or maybe you might have been in freeze as a reaction to someone's like vibe or just emotion towards you as a kid, or you might have just, had a lot of shame and guilt because you might have been caught, for example, showing the sexual organs to other peers or family members. There are various degrees of sexual trauma, and it could be very, very hard, but it could be also lighter. And in my view, every one of us, especially in the society that doesn't treat sex as something completely normal, has some kind of sexual trauma stored in our body, even if it's just being shamed for exploring our sexuality or treating it as a sin. In Poland, where I come from, all the sexual stuff were always a sin in Catholic Church, right? So I repressed and suppressed my sexual energy until I discovered that this is like disowning a part of me that is just natural and human. So I'm not doing it anymore, and I encourage you to also not do it anymore. So let's go into what could be the effects of sexual trauma. You might feel completely disconnected from your body. You might feel the freeze reaction. You might feel that you are a people pleaser. And I spoke about people pleasing before in the podcast. So if you don't know what people pleasing is, you can go and watch it or listen to it. And you might attract narcissists. I also spoke about narcissism recently. And you might attract toxic relationships into your life because of all these stored emotions that are there within you, that then, for the sake of attracting to your life what is known, as your brain is set up what it knows, you keep attracting maybe emotionally unavailable people. Or you might just like really like not respect your own boundaries in relationships, right? So there are a lot of effects that can happen when we have this kind of trauma. And because there are various degrees of sexual trauma, there can be also various effects of it. So whether it was crossing your boundaries, shaming your sexuality, lack of safety in expressing your sexual self, or some kind of sexual pressure put on you, or touch without your consent when you were a kid, or emotional sexual manipulation, or just the feeling of freeze during sexual interaction, Like all of this can have various degrees of reverberations. For example, you can be afraid of intimacy. You can be completely disconnected from your body. You can have zero libido. You can just feel like, okay, I don't ever want to have sex. It's like unsafe. And you're not aware of it because it's your nervous system reaction to what happened so long ago and is so suppressed within you that you don't even know. Or you can be actually hypersexual, more sexual than a normal person, like overly sexual, right? Because that's your subconscious mind trying to make up for it, what happened in childhood. Or you might just have troubles with intimacy generally, or just troubles with trusting people, right? Because, yeah, sexual trauma is a big imprint on our trust towards others. So yeah, the freeze. Remember that the freeze is also a very traumatic reaction where you felt like you couldn't do anything in that situation, right? So these people with especially extreme sexual trauma, they blame themselves because as children, we don't have the understanding that this guy hurts me because of him, not because of me. And we feel in this kind of situation, especially in the hardcore traumas like rape or whatever, like some sexual violence, that we are utterly powerless. We are completely a victim of the circumstance. We feel hopeless. We feel completely worthless, right? Because like our worth is just decreased to zero. Because if we were worthy, we wouldn't have this experience, right? And we might feel angry, we might feel resentment, we might, of course, feel scared because when we are children and we are so innocent, we can't do anything as we are so small. So if the adult or an older person, like a family member, is doing something to us, we can't do shit about it. That's why it's so hard, and that's why it's easier for these people to blame themselves rather than admit to the utter powerlessness that they feel in that moment. And I've worked with various traumas like this. For example, I had a woman come to me and say, I resist men. And she didn't know that it stems from sexual trauma. When we went into the process, she went back to the memory where she was touched at the age of 3 years old by an older man, adult man. Or I worked with someone who was actually suicidal, and the whole depression and suicidal thoughts were caused by rape in childhood. And we went into this memory and we've spent 5 hours total healing this memory. And it was a very complex trauma for this girl. So it wasn't just one time and you're solved. That's why she ended up in psychiatric hospital. Like that's how the sexual trauma, that's how bad it can be. So we are actually not talking about it enough. And I worked with another person who also had some kind of like sexual repression and then came back to the memory where she was touched by her grandmother. And another client who felt some kind of sexual block and then felt sexual energy from his grandmother, even though we don't really know whether it was perceived like this or whether it was actually there. But even if it's just perceived by a baby, it still can be very traumatic. Or another person who turned out to be molested by her stepfather while, the mom and the sister were at home, which was really, really traumatic as well and had big effects on her life. And I want to mention that healing sexual trauma has effects on every other area of your life because it has effect on your self-worth and what you think about yourself, what you think about the world, and how safe or unsafe it is. That's why it's so important to know what to do when you have gone through this kind of experience. But it could be something also like one of my clients came back to the memory where in kindergarten someone was touching her down there, right? And she was feeling so guilty and so shameful about it. Or another person who was just showing her sexual organs to her peers, or another one to her family members like cousins or whatever, because they were just curious. And then the adult came in and started like shaming them for it, for being curious about their own sexuality, which is actually, if you think about it, just a natural development in a human at some age that they start being curious about their sexuality. So there's nothing wrong about it, but because of the societal structures and dysfunctional family dynamics, and religious beliefs. A lot of people are actually so suppressed and have been so shamed, feeling so guilty for being sexual, which is their natural state, that it's actually very, very sad for me to look at it. And I've had many clients with this trauma. And as I said, I think each of us has some kind of varying degree of it, or maybe not like every single person, but most people, because of how the beliefs in society and religion work. And unfortunately, if we don't heal this, we can completely dissociate from our body. We can hate our body even. We can just stop feeling ourselves and not know who we are, or we might be scared of our sexuality, or we might just feel shame every time we feel pleasure. And then it affects our relationships, our intimacy, our safety in the world, our self-worth. As I said, I got inspired to record this episode because recently I've posted a reel about one of the modalities that I use that helps people to go through this experience of releasing emotional charge from sexual trauma without having to feel it. So there are different ways of how we can go about it when it comes to healing sexual trauma. One of the ways is to do trauma work. So, for example, I use the modality by Teal Swan called the completion process, where through feeling the emotions right now, for example, fear of intimacy or shame or guilt about our sexuality, we can trace it back to the original memory. How we do it? It's by feeling the emotion that we feel now to the maximum level and then asking the question, when was the very first time I felt this way? And then at some point, the memory arises, and then we work with it. We release emotional charge. We reprogram how this memory was encoded in our subconscious mind. We reparent our inner child, and we completely switch how we remember this memory and how our body, also our subconscious mind, remembers this memory. And that's when someone is brave enough to face this trauma, to relive it, and to release all these emotions. And also, it's really good if someone is very intellectual and really needs to understand what happened. Because with the modality that I mentioned, Psych K, there is also one way to go about it. We can also release the emotional charge from our body by doing different movements and postures of the body and putting our brain in so-called whole brain state, which is a state of super learning. And then we don't have to actually feel all these emotions, which is great for people who are too sensitive and they can't do it. But we can still shift the energy inside, but then we have no idea what happened and how it happened. We are just releasing this emotional charge from our body through these processes. And some people really need to know what happened and need to go into the traumatic memory because they have the sense of like closure when they go through it. And if they cannot go into the experience in first person perspective, which is the most effective way of healing, because then you are associating with this child in the memory that you were and releasing all the charge, you can start by seeing that trauma happening on the TV screen or movie screen and watching it from the third person perspective first. And only after you get accustomed to it and you feel safe enough, you go into the memory. And I want to mention that this process should not be done by yourself. If you have a big sexual trauma, especially rape, you feel that you are completely powerless and scared. And so then you might not be able to go to the level of depth of the emotion when you're trying to heal it by yourself. It's better to have a therapist, a coach, a best friend, or someone to keep you safe, to feel like a safe space for you to be able to go as deeply as you can into all these emotions. Because otherwise, you might just not get there to this point that will actually make you heal. So that's why I feel it's so important to have someone every time you're trying to reach these experiences next to you and just holding you in it, just being present in it. Because what usually happens in this trauma is we are abandoning ourselves and we feel completely powerless, hopeless, alone, sad, afraid, and so on. So then it's so much easier when you have someone there that can hold you in it. And that's what I really, really highly recommend. So trauma healing, in the way that I mentioned, is one of the ways how you can heal sexual trauma. Another modality that I mentioned is Psych K. So in Psych K, some processes don't require you to feel emotions at all. So for people, especially the ones that have not done a lot of emotional work and feel like they have very strong and heavy sexual trauma, it might be the good modality to go to. I'm the Psych K facilitator, so I'm leading this kind of sessions for my clients as well. And with this modality, you can't really do it by yourself. You need to have a facilitator to guide you through it. So if you're interested to know more, you can comment or contact me at theconnectioncatalyst@gmail.com. So there are also other ways of healing sexual trauma. For example, for women, it could be doing some kind of womb meditation or womb healing process. And for men, it could also just be going into the meditation and just allowing your body to show you what is there suppressed in you. But for me personally, what I saw the biggest effects with my clients were these two modalities: working with the trauma, with the childhood experiences, and working with Psych K when someone really feels like they cannot bear the burden of feeling these emotions again, which is quite comforting because usually these traumas are super heavy if something really bad happened. So then it's good to know that you don't have to always feel everything in order to be able to heal your sexual trauma. Another thing worth mentioning is that you need to give yourself and your body the feeling of safety. You need to regulate your nervous system and do the best you can to ground yourself, to feel stable, to feel safe. Because if you've gone through a sexual trauma, chances are your nervous system is completely screwed in terms of it constantly feels on alert. You might feel anxious, you might feel just, such a low self-esteem that it makes your nervous system go crazy. That's why it's so important when you have a sexual trauma to give your body the rest, the relaxation, the grounding that it needs for your nervous system to just calm down and feel safe. And from this space of safety, it's going to be way easier for you to heal yourself and to even be ready for you to step into the discomfort of healing this kind of trauma. What I personally found in healing my own sexual trauma, not really massive, but in terms of healing shame, healing guilt, but also healing other things in my life, like, for example, going through a breakup and healing the heartbreak, the abandonment wound, and so on. I found that the deeper into the pain that I went, the more pleasure in my sexual life I could feel. Why? Because all this stuck emotion that was previously in my body is not there anymore when I heal. And therefore, more and more sexual energy can flow in me because there is more space in my body for it. That's why I highly encourage to heal not only your sexual trauma, but generally learn how to work with your emotions, which I already explained how to work with your emotions in one of my previous podcast episodes, and really release them from your body, all this suppressed stuff that doesn't let you feel the utmost level of pleasure in sex and generally in life. Because sexual energy is creative energy. So if we are suppressing this part of us, we also are suppressing our creativity and our fulfillment in life. So I really encourage you to look, do I feel that I'm in a way disconnected from my body? Or do I feel uncomfortable about my sexuality or in intimacy with someone? And then if I do I want to do something about it? Because there are ways that I mentioned to go through these emotions in a way where you need to live through them, and when you don't need to even live through them, but you just still release them from your body, and then you are free and way more whole within. If you have any questions about this, please don't hesitate to comment or send it to someone who might need to hear it. And if you like my vibe, you can also subscribe. And thank you so much for listening. I feel like it's such an important topic to talk about and to bring up because of this whole taboo of sexuality. That's why I decided I'm going to talk way more about sex from now on, because in my upbringing, it was always normal to talk about it. So I feel like not everyone was as lucky as me to be brought up in this way. And that's why I feel like I'm the right person to bring it up. So let's talk about sex. Let's talk about sex. And anyway, so if you feel like you have some suppressed emotions in your sexuality, you can write me at theconnectioncatalyst@gmail.com and let's see if we can do something about it. Thank you so much for being here with me today. And I wish you the most pleasure and the most connection to yourself and to your body that you can ever have, especially after healing your sexual trauma. Until the next episode.